Looks like we're good. We meet again, Rexy.
How you doing, Lou?
I'm quite well. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, man.
Excellent. We're here at the Scope Factory, or the Scope Emporium.
We're here at the wife's kitchen table, which we have taken over to review all these optics. Okay. Okay, pull up. Howdy guys, Rex here.
And Lou.
How you like all this stuff on the table today, Lou?
There's a lot of stuff going on, man.
There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that went into this one, guys. This has been like over a year in the making. As you guys know, if you're a subscriber of the channel, we like to actually test the stuff a lot before we decide to have an opinion on it too hard. I've done teaser reviews on most of these things already. But now we're going to actually share with you our experiences and give you our recommendations and advice on these different items that we got laying here.
This is the video a lot of folks have been waiting for, I think.
Yeah, the battle of the Japanese-made scopes, basically. There's some that didn't make it into here, but we're talking about scopes for series shooters that are looking for something kind of nice, but don't want to waste their money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we evaluated a few different emblematic models. There's a lot of other scope companies coming out. There's new stuff coming out every day, so by the time we hit the upload button, this might possibly be somewhat obsolete. However, in the spirit of a true testing, we had to actually battle test these scopes. And what we do is we take them out, we run them through the ringer, we take them out in multiple environments, right? Like the freezing cold when it's actually like 50 below, not exaggerating, 50 below Fahrenheit, which we've done.
With the wind chill.
With the wind chill, yeah.
Sometimes
solid 20,
without.
solid 25 below at least. And we take them out in the 100 degrees. We get dirt on them. We slam them around. We throw them in and out of the vehicle. We treat them like a tool that is to be used. We don't baby these optics when we review them. I like to anticipate all the different ways that Murphy likes to revisit a delicate instrument and duplicate those so that before you guys buy stuff, you can at least know kind of what to expect in terms of performance.
And Mr. Murphy does come around when you least need it.
Yeah, I've been there many a times. Some of the best stuff in the world I've totally broken as well. So we're going to give you the full honest review here. And what scopes are we looking at here today, Lou? Do you remember?
We've got a variety.
We do. We've got the primary arms is on the lower end of the price bracket. This is the Platinum Series. 6 to 30 series, and we got a couple different of those. We have the Nightforce ATACR. This is the 5 to 25, And these are both 34 millimeter scopes. Actually, all these are 34 millimeter main tube scopes. We do have one of these on the table. This is one we're going to review for the next year. This is a SIG, and we haven't got the chance to run that through the paces quite yet. But then we have the Vortex Generation 2 Razor, and this one is the 3 to 18 power. And we got quite the chance to try all these things out and see how they operate, man.
And these are all Japanese, right?
Yeah. So there's a 3 different big facilities in Japan that do most of the optics manufacturing there. And for those who are uninitiated in the videos or maybe don't know how the world works in terms of optics, people argue about which brand is better, okay? Which manufacturer is better for scopes. And the reality is, in the 21st century, Asia is the one that makes pretty much all the optics that make it to the hardware counter or the sportsman store in the United States. Europe also makes optics, and there's a couple that are starting to be American made very recently, but those are like rare as hen's teeth. So you got European stuff, which is a whole different category, a whole different animal, kind of like this Schmidt & Bender PM2 we got laying here. An old classic, which is a battle-hardened deal that I've got a couple of them. That's my scope that I usually use. But when you're talking about sporting optics, stuff that you get over the counter, it's all Asian manufactured. The stuff from Japan, generally speaking, tends to be very well made, generally speaking. Now, there's different optics facilities in Japan. Some of them have a reputation for being maybe a little bit better, like Light Optic Works in Japan. Does a great job, usually. But really, it doesn't have everything to do with where it's made, but rather what the company in the United States who's contracting these guys to do, the parameters they put on the company in terms of quality control inspection and in-house inspection when they come in, and how they sign the contracts and stuff like that. So how fussy are they going to be when these things are made? Because you're going to have problems. It's a scope is a very complex instrument, and there's a lot of stuff that you can get out of whack on these to where they don't operate exactly right. And for extreme long-range precision shooting, which is what all the scopes on this table are specifically configured for, you have to be very careful. Now, if you're doing standard shooting, like like just shooting at 100 yards, shooting coyotes, shooting deer, shooting prairie dogs, if your life does not depend on it, then it doesn't really matter as much. There's a lot of options at your disposal at that point. But for tactical applications or for competitive shooting where you have a lot of money invested into going on a trip, or especially for if you're doing like hunting where it's a very, very, very critical deal, you spend $15,000 on a trip to go shoot an ibex out of the Karakoram Mountains, you can't have stuff get all squirrely on you. You're going to be pissed, right? So this review is for like serious long-range shooter guys who don't want the scope to get screwed up, okay? And are looking for good value. So we're going to go over each one of these. We did do a side-by-side comparison of the 3 main contenders, which we're going to discuss here: the primary arms, the Vortex, and the Nightforce. Basically, this is in your $1,000. The primary arms is in your $1,000 general price range, ranging from maybe just under $1,000 to $1,200, depending on if you get a used one or new one. The next price bracket up is generally speaking in a $2,000 price range. The Vortex Gen 2 razors, they're a bit more than that now. Sometimes they go a little more expensive than that. And then in your $3,000 price range, you have the Nightforce stuff. The 34 millimeter Nightforce is like the TACR or the Beast. Okay. Now, one thing you got to keep in your mind is that each different scope is going to be an individual deal, okay?
Very true.
And when you're doing scientific or engineering comparisons of different items, you can have a lot of anecdotal experiences, which means that if you only had one scope and it broke and it sucked, you don't have enough information to really make a scientific assessment of whether that thing is actually going to work or not. For example, if I took this Nightforce out and broke it, which I did on this thing, it still works, but it's broke. I can't say, oh, they all will break, because it's only one. Statistically speaking, you need a sample size of a lot more than one, okay? We'll just say it like that. 30 is a good number. And who's going to buy 30 $3,000 scopes just to test them, besides Department of Defense contracted guys, right? Okay? So there's anecdotal experiences that people have had, which means that you might have a different experience than what we're talking about here. That's fine. That's awesome. We welcome your comments. Please do comment on your experience down below. and let us know how your stuff performed. And so that we can compare notes, because there's a lot of stuff that happens. And these are all made by humans, right?
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed too before we start on the review is that a lot of times people invest a lot of emotion into their equipment. That's one of the adolescent signs of inexperience, in my opinion, where people invest all their emotion into their equipment selection and they get offended if their equipment is either neglected or spoken badly of. From their point of view. So we're not here to offend anybody. We're just giving you observational experience and data and stuff that basically we've wrestled with for a long time to give you a good, true, honest assessment of what we're talking about.
Brand loyalty is a big thing, though.
It is. Brand loyalty is a huge deal.
You grow up, you're either a Ford guy or a Chevy guy or maybe a Dodge guy, and you live with that till the day you die.
It's just human nature, man.
Yeah.
We're going to try to evade that. I'm going to give each one of these optics its fair shake.
So where do you want to start, Mr. Rex?
Well, let's start on the high dollar price end of the spectrum. So the Nightforce, the reason this isn't on a rifle at the moment is because we ended up, we do a lot of optics reviews and a lot of testing and a lot of stuff like that. This is currently not on the rifle that we reviewed it on. We were shooting this on a 6.5 Creedmoor for quite a while. It was on an axial precision rifle. It's actually a pretty nice scope. I like Nightforce in general. Nightforce is made in one of the prime optics manufacturing plants in Japan. This is a Japanese scope. The AT-ACR is a 34 millimeter main tube, which gives you a lot of adjustment range. So this puts it in the category of a long-range precision scope. In general, speaking about the Nightforce AT-ACR and the Beast, they're pretty decent optics. I like these a lot better than the NXS series that are the 30 millimeter main tubes. These are they're expensive though. They're like $3,000+. Now, I could look at any of the scopes on these tables, and I could tell you that if you took them apart and looked at some of the internal components, they're made from, a lot of these are made in the exact same plant by maybe even the same people with even the same parts, but
a different stamp on them.
Yes. So these are branded separately. These different companies will have these manufactured with different styles, different colors. The Vortex, you'll see, has a cool bronze kind of, I don't know what the hell color this is called, but it's kind of a burnt like bronze kind of color.
It's sexy.
Yeah, which is very emblematic of what they got in their Generation 2 lineup. And they'll vary in the exact turret design, but if you take them apart and start looking at the details, you're going to find out that a lot of these places, once you get into some of the information on the inside, are kind of made in the same place and are using the same geometry of the parts, the same specifications of the internal adjustment mechanisms, and even in some cases, the exact same internal mechanisms.
Most people wouldn't know that, though.
Yeah, well, another thing is you got to be aware of is that they're going to all vary in price as well. So let's say this scope here, this Nightforce is $3,000, but the primary arms is like $1,200.
Less than half.
What's the difference in the price? Where does it go to? Now, I'm not going to talk smack about any company, but I'm going to tell you the reality of where the price does go. So there's different philosophies here. Nightforce does a huge amount of quality control in-house. So when they order these things from the factory, they get them in, and they're like obnoxious about their quality control, so they have humans check each one.
Every single one.
Well, you know, the inspection rates probably vary, but I'll tell you that from what the word around the campfire is that they have very, very strict quality control mechanisms in place in terms of inspections when they come in, and so they'll pay the extra money for the factory there to actually verify that all the parts are in fact working together. Like when you have a complex instrument like this with your alignment of your lenses all have to be right, and even just matching the glass to some degree is a difficult task because there's no such thing as an absolute perfect lens without paying $1 billion.
Yeah.
Right? So everything's going to have some degree of imperfection to it. That being said, if you have a lens stack and you have all the different lenses in there, you can arrange them in such a way that where the sum total of the entire optics come out to be pretty darn clear because it balances itself out. And also with the tracking mechanism, the turrets, the magnification, all that stuff, there's slight variations in the individual parts, but cumulatively they can They can have tolerance stack cumulatively. So if you have a little bit of slop here and a little bit of slop in the wrong place, one's a little bit too loose and the other one's a little bit too loose in the wrong way, you're going to, cumulatively, they're going to be extra loose, right? So what Nightforce has done is they've made darn sure that they check all that stuff and they fit it individually in the factory. So they make sure that, like, okay, if one's part's too loose, the other one will be a little bit too tight, and then they even each other out, and then it's about right.
They balance each other out.
So what they do is they attain pretty darn good reputation and performance, not because they're different parts. The parts in these are very much the same as scopes that cost a lot less. However, they're assembled by guys that are under strict quality control parameters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's what you pay for too then.
It's expensive to do that. You have to have a human sit there and do a lot of work. So that's why these things are like 30 whatever, I don't know, what do they cost now? $3,500 for an ACR, or maybe 32, 36, I don't know. The price keeps going up, okay? So for $3,000, Nightforce had decided they'll just take it upon themselves to do everything and then charge you for it. They're going to make sure that it's good, okay? Now, when we're looking at this scope, this is a Vortex Generation 2 Razor, a very popular model. This is seen by a lot of guys as like one of the most probably popular scopes that you'll see in competitive shooting circles like PRS and things like that. A lot of guys run these. A lot of guys who even do pretty good run these. And these are in the mid $2,000 range. They used to be about $2,000, $1,999, whatever. The price is continuously evolving depending on exactly what model you're looking at. All these companies are going to offer really good features depending on your preferences. If you like first focal plane, Nightforce offers one in first focal plane. This one's second focal plane. But these, the turret mechanisms are built smart. You got 25 minutes of angle of revolution on this particular one, but we're getting beyond the configuration, right? In this review, one thing I want to stress too before we get too much into the weeds here is that in the last 5 years, a lot of scope companies have come out with really smart configurations, or a variety of configurations. And what I mean by that is some guys like mill systems, some guys like minutes of angle, some guys like different kinds of zero stops. So there's different features that can be on the scope. What we're reviewing in this particular review, because there's a million features to choose from, are the quality of those features. Okay? Because you can have all the cool features in the world, but they have to work, right? So the Vortex philosophy here, and this is just my opinion, they offer a scope for, it's a bit cheaper than the Nightforce because they don't have to really go through all that, but they have a very good warranty. So a lot of guys run these and they run great and they do really good in competitive circles. Some guys win with these, quite often. They're highly popular in gun stores. This is one of the nicer scopes you can find over the counter alongside Nightforce. That is in gun stores, and so a lot of guys really gravitate towards these because when they're looking for quality and you don't want to shop around for some kind of expensive European optics, this is a good choice. The glass is very clear. It's very nice. When you compare glass with the Nightforce versus the Vortex, even in low light conditions, they're very similar, man. It's almost hard to tell the difference. You can tell a little bit of a difference. Man, it's arguable. So honestly, they're almost hard to compare in terms of optical clarity under low light conditions. They're both Apple chromatically corrected lenses from Japan. It's not European glass, but it is high density Japanese glass, which is actually pretty darn good too. And so the optical clarity, which is what a lot of people will define how good a scope is good on basically all three of these, but especially good in these two. So the Vortex and the Nightforce, these high-end models both sport very good glass. The Nightforce does seem a little bit cool, maybe. Like when I say cool, I mean it looks a little more blue. This one has a very nice warm look to it. The reticles in both is more of a user's preference, but they both have good reticles, good features, good optical clarity. The question comes in the reliability of the mechanisms, okay? So when we're talking about a lot of that quality control stuff just a second ago, where Nightforce spends a lot of their money when they build these scopes for over $3,000, is in the reliability of the turret tracking mechanisms. What that means is that at long range shooting, you have to dial in a firing solution. You have to adjust your elevation to shoot at long distances if you're not going to be using the reticle. And if you do use the reticle, then you got to make sure that the reticle is actually done properly and placed into the correct exact geometry of the optics so that it's at the right focal point so that it's actually scaled properly, right? So Nightforce spend a lot of their money making sure that all the turret mechanisms would come out to be very reliable, number one, but also precise. So if you adjust this thing, 27.9 minutes of angle or 10.3 mils or whatever, you're going to be doing here, it's going to go to whatever you adjusted very reliably. Pretty much, you can usually count on these are pretty good. This scope has a little bit different of philosophy. The inspection rates are maybe not as stringent as on the Nightforce, so they can be a little bit cheaper. They're like the $2,000 price range, right? And they're very nicely configured, like we said earlier. But when we tested this, and this is the third one I've had a hold of, and I've talked to a bunch of other guys, and we get these in on our classes a lot, you will find sometimes issues with tracking reliability. Tracking precision on most Japanese scopes is not going to be exactly dead on with let's say a Schmidt and Bender. Like if you look and quantify the precision of your tracking, you're going to find that there's not anything with the Japanese three-piece mechanism of the turrets that pushes on the erector tube that are going to give you that absolute 100% precision. Mm-hmm. So if you're in the whole category of Japanese scopes, don't look for like 100% precision. You might get like 98.5% in a really good one, or sometimes you might get 50% because something completely pooped the bed, right? So let's go back to the Nightforce real quick here. The Nightforce, actually, we did break it. We bent the turret because I was jumping on it. Seriously.
You do battle test them, though.
I use them, and then if they work normal, then I use them harder. And if they still work normal, then I use them a little harder. And then I eventually break it. Usually.
Inevitably.
Usually. Yep. If I get enough time on it. So that, as you can see, maybe you can't. The elevation turret is bent out of whack, but the scope still operates with precision, and it works fine. But it did bend the heck out of that post on there. But it is working. The Vortex in our testing, we did lose the ability to adjust our traverse adjustment after maybe 120 rounds, or I forget how many rounds. It wasn't more than 200 rounds into our testing on a 6.5 Creedmoor, and we did not get into any radical phase testing yet. What can happen on some of these is there's little screws on these turret caps that attach to the inner mechanism, the post inside there. And when you tighten them up, that's what locks up this outer part of the cap with the inner part, which is actually the thing that adjusts the mechanism, right? And if you get the tension on these screws just a little bit off, a lot of guys will experience a complete failure to adjust, because sometimes this might get a little of an elliptical deformation to it, which causes, if you got an ellipse shape, some of the screws ain't touching, so you might pull, and there's a little post on the inside the screw is tensioning against, and when you turn, it'll slip past it. So what I was finding out is that if you adjust, I was starting to adjust like 2 minutes to the left, and it was not adjusting at all. So I came back to 100 yards to verify if it was a mechanical issue, and it had absolutely no traverse adjustment anymore. Boy. And we checked the tension on the screws. I'm pretty anal when we actually do that kind of stuff, especially in phase one of the testing. I like to make sure I treat everything like a baby, make sure that it's doing good. And the screws tension was fine, but sometimes there's just minor details that happen in real life with any piece of equipment that can happen. But the good news is, Vortex has an excellent warranty, and so you can basically take this out and throw it on the road and drive on it, and they'll give you a new one, right?
Just don't shoot it.
Well, actually, you can do that and get away with it, too. I know people, okay? So that's when you pay for the Vortex, this is in the $2,000 price range, a little more, right? It's $1,000 more than the primary arms, but they have invested a lot into their scope to make it, I mean, it's very, very nicely configured.
Oh, yeah.
It's very attractive. Like we said, the glass is very nice. The features, when they work, are very good. But out of all the three we tested, one of them broke in the primary phase of testing, like the initial phase, and this is the one there. And the other two just they just didn't work after the secondary phase, which is getting a little bit more use out of them, like in a PRS type environment from guys that I know. And so the reality is that these have a very good warranty, and that's where the extra money goes on these, being the $2,000, $2,500 price ranges, is built into the price. so that they can make sure they cover the warranties that come in. So it's a very nice optic. Unfortunately, I would like to get another one of these maybe and test it again, but that's the third one of these models. I've tested the Generation 1, and they had the same issues for me. Again, we're just trying to be honest. We've had a total of these of 3, which is not 30 of them. But and then the PSTs are a whole different story. So let's look at the primary arms a little bit. And this is the 6-30 Platinum here, and you guys have seen these on the reviews as well. For about a year, we've been testing these, and I had 2 of them in my possession, and we battle tested these as well in the Arctic conditions and beat the crap out of them and throw them around in the truck. And like we said earlier, we're pretty rough on our stuff. This is on a 7mm-300 Magnum Wildcat round, a pretty stout rifle, and the features again are nice, just like these other 2 models. In terms of reliability performance, the tracking seemed to actually be pretty darn good. It kept up with the Nightforce and the Vortex in terms of tracking precision. So it was like not exactly perfect, but it was like 99% perfect. It was close. And we actually, at our classes, had about, I don't know, 8 of these other ones to observe, 8 or 10 of them. I don't remember exactly how many, but a lot of guys are running this exact scope in the class, so we had a lot larger sample size, and they all worked well. And we do quantify their tracking precision at the class on box to bench precision targets, which we'll have the link for here below. If you do want to test your optic and see how well it's testing, you can go to box to bench precision targets, and they'll give you a tracking box test that you can do on there to determine that factor. And so this thing actually was the one scope out of the 3 that I didn't break. I was every bit as rough on it as the other ones. However, it's not quite as bright as the Vortex, and it's not quite as the mechanisms of adjustments don't seem as crisp on here.
It is a little mushy.
So the performance was good on the optic, but it's a little bit darker when you crank it up to 30 power. It does have a greater magnification range, so 6-30. So if you go higher in magnification, you're going to lose a little bit of that light, right? The Nightforce that we're trying here is the 25 power, and the Vortex was the 18 power. When we adjusted all 3 of these to the same exact power range, the primary arms was slightly noticeable to be just a little bit dimmer than the other 2. These 2 did amazing on the light quality. But this one wasn't quite up to speed there. In terms of reliability, 100% reliable tracking in terms of going to the same place every time. So that's the main characteristic you're looking for in a precision scope. You can always adjust that factor if you're using ballistic software. Most ballistic apps or most intelligently designed ballistic software will have a mechanism where you can adjust your units of measurement a little bit and tweak that number. So on any of these Japanese scopes that aren't tracking with 100% precision, you can adjust that. So this scope is priced around $1,200. The warranty, I forget the warranty details are. I think that is fine as well. Like you can get it replaced if you're not being stupid with it. And I think they all got a pretty decent warranty on them, actually. Okay, so let's now take a look at the actual features themselves and how they feel. Most reviewers would concentrate on what we're doing here as part 2 of the review, which is how the features feel. A lot of times guys will concentrate on how the clicks feel on the scopes, right? The clicks on the Nightforce are very crisp and clear. Definitely, you can tell that the clicking mechanism is very nice. And that's something that is generally indicative of quality. And so that's why the click test has gotten so much attention over the years. However, I'm more interested in that those clicks actually move the inside of the scope.
That they're connected to something.
They got to be connected to something in there. Otherwise, I'm very angry, okay? And so the clicks on this scope seem to be fine. The parallax adjustment on the side adjustment here is actually nice and smooth. The magnification turns nice and smooth. Everything's put together very nicely on the Nightforce. When you look at the Vortex, you got to lift up on the turret cap on these, and you can play with it too. Then we can compare notes again because we all played with these before quite a bit. The clicks are very nice. They make it very indicative of a decent amount of quality in the clicking mechanism. Where we had trouble was that the turrets did not track on the inside when whatever came loose, and we still haven't determined exactly what that is. The other two that they sent back supposedly had a few screws that were slightly out of spec that made stuff not work exactly properly.
That is nice, though.
Yeah, it's got a nice feel to it. So that's something the guys really like when they're playing with them at the gun store and stuff. Is it makes you think it's going to have really nice overall quality to it. And so Vortex was very smart when they decided to spend a little bit more time and money on making sure they could get nice, positive, crisp clicks out of the turrets. And if you try the primary arms, you can feel the difference, right?
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, it's a bit mushy.
There's still a click there. There's just not quite as much space in between them, it feels like.
Yeah, it's what most people describe as a little mushy.
Mushy.
Yeah, so that's the proper terminology for what that feels like right there. However, like I said before, the things I concentrate on are tracking, precision, and reliability. And all these were basically, when they were operational, until this one broke, have all very similar tracking precision. They were right in that 98 to 99% accurate. The feel on them is definitely, you can tell that the Nightforce is done very nicely, and the Vortex has a nice feel to it too. The primary arms is a whole another $1,000 less. So this is like a third the cost of the Nightforce, and quite a bit less than the Vortex, like half as much as the Vortex, right? And so I think that maybe some of the details there are that, on some of those peripheral things, they didn't maybe spend as much money on those. They just went straight for the mechanism itself. So that's the overall impression you will have of these optics when you pick them up and play with them, short of shooting them. If you compare different features on these scopes, one of the important features as well is the reticle. And Nightforce has a lot of reticle designs. Vortex has a lot of really nice reticle designs as well. And Primary Arms has some interesting kind of like thinking outside the box type designs. This 6-30 Platinum has a decamil reticle, and this one has the HUD. And that's the two main offerings they're offering right at the moment. This one's a more clean of a reticle. It's meant for precision rifle shooting where the guy is going to index the scope onto the target. You have subdivide the reticle geometrically to actually get your ranging in there. That's what that design is about. And you can read the instructions on how that works so that you can see what the objective is. It's actually pretty smartly designed for guys that want to use the reticle for very precise measurements. If you're doing like analog range estimation using the mil formula. The HUD reticle in this 6-30 that we have here is developed for the 308 cartridge. This is a DMR style reticle, but it's made for combat, for the 308 load. It has a lot of the ballistic drop compensation built into it. It's actually one of the smarter reticles in that design. For ballistic drop compensation, this is very easy to be able to run out to even 800 and 1,000 yards with a 308. On man-sized targets, it has target leads, wind hold-off dots, range estimation from crotch to head, mil marks, and ballistic drop compensation. A very dynamic reticle that's actually employed pretty smart. So if you're running a 308 and you're going to use it on a battle rifle, this is actually my World War III rifle right here. The HUD is awesome because you don't have to remember anything in the heat of the moment, so to speak, to run this thing quite effectively. The decamil reticle is more of a precision rifle platform where you're going to be indexing a custom firing solution. So those are the differences in the reticles, and there's a huge amount of different reticle selections that are very nice in the Vortex lineup as well as in the Nightforce. So there's too many probably to talk about in the review. Now, a lot of that has to do with user's preference, but to be honest, I kind of like a clean reticle, so I really like the decamil reticle for precision rifle work. I don't like too much stuff going on with my style of shooting. If you're doing, if there's more time pressure on you, then a ballistic drop compensation or a mil grid system of some kind is going to probably be a little bit more high speed, low drag, and then you won't have to worry about the turret mechanism is not working. And so, for example, if you do have an issue, like if you lose your windage turret, if you can get back to zero somehow, if you can at least stay in zero, you can just use the reticle for hold off. And that's the nice thing about some of these reticle designs is you don't necessarily need to worry about the turret. So if you have one of these other designs and one of them poops the bed one day and you have a good reticle, like on this, we have a nice reticle in this Razor 2 here, you're going to be fine if it's still zeroed because you can just apply hold off, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's advantages to using the reticle, especially in Asian scopes, the Japanese scopes. in case something doesn't work exactly right or you break something and you have the reticle as a backup. Or if you just don't even worry about that, you're not turning up and down, you can't get lost in your adjustments. So we talk about a lot of that stuff in our instructional series, all the advantages and disadvantages of both ways of dialing the scope by indexing the scope or by holding off using the reticle. So that's a lot of fun.
Yes, sir. Smart designs, though.
Yeah.
They really are.
And there's a lot of good scopes. All these are actually really nice scopes. It depends on what your philosophy is. If you're looking for the best one, like if I actually was going to go into like some kind of life and death type situation with a precision rifle, right? Like if I was law enforcement or a military guy or people depended on me with their lives that my optic wouldn't be bad, I would probably opt for the Nightforce just because of their level of vetting of each scope. They do a very good job, and that's in the ATCR and the Beast series.
Our buddy Charlie Melton, that's what he ran, right?
Yeah, Charlie was a Nightforce guy for a long time.
Yeah.
And they a lot of professional operators still use that because of that reason. A lot of really proficient law enforcement guys, military guys. Mr. Kyle used the Nightforce. They're a well-vetted battle scope. So if you're in World War III and you want to use a Japanese optic, then the Nightforce is the way to go. I would prefer to use the German because I like the Schmidt and Bender, but that's just my personal preference, right? When we're talking about if you want something that you can get kind of rough with, I think this is maybe one of the reasons a lot of PRS guys really kind of like the Vortex scopes is because PRS is a sport where they're doing a lot of running around and they're somewhat hard on their equipment, sort of like I am. And so they do break a lot of stuff. They are very hard on their equipment. And with that being said, Vortex has really good customer service. So if you have any problems, they're not going to screw you around. They're not going to give you the 20 questions game. They'll just replace it for you. And that is one thing I hand to Vortex. They have really good customer service. They don't make you fill out a questionnaire or do a drug test when you turn in your scope for whatever you did, right? They're not going to do a breathalyzer on you when you break your scope. So for a lot of the professional competitive shooters, I think that's why they're very popular in those circles, is because you can get kind of rough with them and not worry about it, because that's a big investment as a scope. And then Vortex has a good reputation based on their warranty. For guys that are looking for probably the best value and they want to get into the market but not spend $1 million but still want something that works very well, I think that the Primary Arms is probably the best choice, because these are like $1,000 or $1,200 compared to $3,000 and $2,000, right? So like a whole another $1,000 below the Vortex, but this is made in the same place, using the same parts with very much the same features, and it's way less on the price. And if you do so happen to have a problem, they'll still replace it for you. That's not usually an issue, right? But these are probably a little better value. You will notice some subtle differences in terms of the glass clarity and brightness. The turret mechanisms are a little bit mushier. But in terms of precision, I can verify after 1.5 years of testing on this that it actually is a pretty darn tough scope. And we froze it and we beat the crap out of it and we jumped on it and we had observed the performance of quite a few of them, and they actually perform every bit as good as these two in terms of turret tracking, reliability, and precision, which are the key things you need to look out for. And so that's, I guess, the 3 different categories. Really, there's not one that's better than the other automatically without defining your criteria.
They all shine in different ways.
They do. And so a lot of guys get very defensive if any one of their babies is critiqued, right, one way or the other. But really what I got to say is that depending on exactly what you're trying to get accomplished, there are advantages. So it's not that anyone's dumb for running the cheap scope or the expensive scope or the middle price scope. It's just exactly which way you want to skin that cat, because they're all made by men. They're all instruments that are actually pretty nice. The Japanese do a very good job on these. But my assessment would be you got to match it to your application and let the parameters of your objective define what you're going to buy.
Spoken like a true scientist.
That's correct.
So in the battle of the Japanese scopes here, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish, what your application is.
Exactly. Yep. So for guys wanting to get in the market and spend the least amount of money and get the best value per dollar, I'd clearly say primary arms is a very good choice to go there. For guys that are actually going to depend on it with their life, probably spend $3,000 and get this one or one of the tier 1 German battle optics. And for competitive guys who plan on, getting rough with them and needing to use the warranty a lot, maybe a Vortex would be a pretty good way to go, because these are very easy to find too. A lot of these other scopes are a little more difficult to find. Vortex is very ubiquitous. You can find it anywhere. So it's another logistical compatibility issue as well, of why a lot of guys do like the Vortex, is because they can just go over the counter and get it replaced at a match. If they have a bad day, something breaks, you go in there, you can do a lot of over-the-counter replacements. Some of these other outfits won't really do that. You have to send it in, right?
But they've all got their strong suits for sure.
They do. And I respect all three of these scopes. I wouldn't make fun of anyone for running any one of these. It just depends on exactly what you're trying to do. Now, if I would make fun of somebody if they were trying to use stuff for the wrong purpose, right? But given the parameters that we defined earlier, I think that it's a fair assessment to say that all of them do have their place in the market. And that's my general overview of how these different scopes compare.
But she hits me, disassembles my leg. So I went to the doctor and he gave me a pain. Now she waits, slumber, dreaming, praying, hope that she kills instead of leaving with me. Cause she's a minefield, she pops your body from your soul. Minefield, leave a big smoking hole. Minefield, please don't beat off my leg. Minefield, that little round thing over there?